Anytime you agree to play a cooperative game with a bunch of people, you're kind of entering into a social contract. And if you remember from maybe your philosophy 101 or maybe high school or any conversation, the social contract is kind of a philosophy type thing. I'm not going to go into that. We're not going to talk about Thomas Locke. We're not going to talk about a whole bunch of other things. But I do want to kind of talk about the social contract you enter with your players and you as a player with everybody else at the table when you decide to play a game. My name is Don. I'm trying to be the theSlyStrategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. Now, when I'm talking about a social contract, let's go ahead and define that a little bit. Basically, the theory, the big pie in the sky theory that I don't want to get too far into, basically states that people choose to live together or play together in a society in accordance with an agreement that establishes moral and political rules of behavior. Now, how that kind of relates to your table is when you enter a table either with a group of your friends or maybe online with people you don't know, you are basically agreeing at that time to try to ensure that everybody has fun, everybody has a good time, and everybody gets to get what they want out of the game every time they decide to play. Now, this is a role-playing game, and role-playing is a big part of playing tabletop role-playing games. Not every table is the same. Some are more combat-oriented, some are more role-playing oriented, and they won't roll dice for 2 or 3 sessions in a row. But it is good to sometimes have an idea of what you're getting into when you decide to sit at a table and you decide to play a character in order to try to ensure that everyone at the table is having fun. You, the other players, and the other player that is also the game master for the game. Now, this doesn't have to necessarily be super defined. It doesn't have to be a physical contract. But I do suggest that it is discussed during your session 0 that everybody is there to have fun. No one should take over the game with role playing, and no one should allow their character to kind of hamper the enjoyment of the game with other people. So these laws, it can be explicit. It can be something that is written down on a piece of paper. Doesn't require signatures or anything along those lines. But if you have a handout at the start of your game, you could include something that basically stipulates that you are trying to ensure that everyone is having as good a time as possible while all being involved. But with that being said, let's talk about maybe some in-game things that, whether explicitly stated or maybe it's just something you should know just as being a player and table etiquette, what can happen in a game. Now, as we're referring to role-playing, there are various things that you do in-game that determine how you play, and there are ways that you, being a role player, can sometimes hamper the enjoyment of other players. I'm going to cover a few things here, basically 3 big ones and then a couple out-of-game things, but the first one I kind of want to cover is alignment. Now, for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, that's going away with Anathema and Edicts. However, even if you're not playing Pathfinder and you're playing Dungeons & Dragons or another tabletop role-playing game, alignment at this point in time is all still there. Now, playing to alignment doesn't necessarily mean that you're playing to be a jerk, or you shouldn't be playing to be a jerk. Your character could be chaotic evil, or sometimes just as bad, lawful good, and your alignment shouldn't hamper the fun of everybody else at the table. Sometimes you can use alignment as a role-playing crutch, and just think of a couple examples. If you are chaotic, specifically chaotic evil, but if you kind of play up the chaotic element of your particular character, sometimes you use it to cause trouble, just to cause trouble. And because your character may be chaotic evil, maybe it should have been decided in session 0 what alignment the group would like to play with. Or if you're chaotic neutral or chaotic good, just because your character's player is chaotic doesn't mean that they should cause trouble, unwanted trouble, for the rest of the table unless the entire table agrees that that is the way they want to play. If you're in an inn and you are chaotic neutral and you decide that you're going to go ahead and stab another bar patron for no reason, he stepped in front of you in line for the ale, he said something to someone else he was talking to that you didn't like, and you decide to go to stab him. Well, now the rest of the party probably won't be allowed in that bar again, might not be allowed in that town, and might have to go to jail or try to get you out of jail while you find another base of operations, simply because you are the chaotic evil or chaotic neutral or chaotic good character in your party. There are times when, even in real life, when you have that one friend that's just kind of like a big mess, or you might be that friend that is the big mess. I know sometimes I am, but even if I am a big mess, a lot of times in certain social situations, if I'm with a group of people, maybe my first thought in my head is to go out and do something that's a little bit crazy. But because I'm with a group of people, I'm not going to do that thing simply because it's going to cause so much trouble for everyone else that is around me. At a role-playing table, it's the same way. Just because your character has certain predilections to do certain things doesn't mean you have to act at them all the time. Lawful good sometimes can't be that much better than a chaotic evil could be. Lawful good, you don't want to play it as being a lawful jerk. And what I mean by that is, if you have a party that wants to go and enjoy a festival and your lawful good character sees some things occurring in the festival that are an anathema to what they do, they might not go. That's totally fine. But having them tell the rest of the party they can't participate, that's really not okay, because that takes a whole bunch of the fun of a adventure kind of out of it, because of one player doesn't feel that their character would want to do something. Once again, from the chaotic side, we were saying that you have predilections and you can act against them without necessarily being a sellout to your particular alignment. But same thing for lawful characters. Just because you are lawful doesn't mean that you can't participate, doesn't mean that you can't at least not prevent the other players from participating, as long as it is not a true anathema to your character. If you have a cleric or you have a champion that doing something is going to make them lose power, understandable, then you don't have to participate. But allow everyone else at the table to participate in order to ensure the adventure continues and to ensure that everybody else is having fun, as well as the game master, who probably spent hours preparing this whole thing for someone to come in because of their alignment, chaotic or lawful, and deciding, well, we just can't do that because I'm lawful good or I'm chaotic evil. Move on to another in-game thing that could possibly do it, although less likely, although we've mentioned it already. In truth, it's champions, clerics, these type of classes that generally have fairly strict, or if not even fairly strict, they have anathemas and edicts that actually affect them. You don't want to allow those particular things to affect the entire party. There might be certain things that you believe in as your character that necessarily you wouldn't want to do or you can't see your character doing, but for someone who is not your particular class, it wouldn't be a problem. Let's say you want to go to a festival and something is occurring at the festival, or something is being celebrated at the festival that your character wouldn't agree with. Let's say it was a revolution. Let's say it was a celebration of an execution. Let's say it was in a region of Galarion that Geb or something along those lines that you just wouldn't agree with what is occurring. You don't have to participate, but allow the party to participate. Or if you would like to participate, maybe you could even begrudgingly participate and grumble about it, but literally saying that no one at the table can do something simply because your character wouldn't want to do it, that can be a little bit limiting for everybody else. The last in-game thing I'd like to talk about is backstory. Now, backstory is super great when you are starting a new character. It's also great for the GM to know what hooks they can use to tie in when they're trying to further the story or do some side quests or make just the adventure more interesting. However, if you shackle yourself to the backstory the whole time, then you can really limit the party. Let me think of an example. A good example, if you have a character whose backstory, for some reason you decided to make them claustrophobic. Well, if that's the case, then maybe dungeons are out, caves are out for the entire party because you aren't going to participate. At that particular point, you choosing to not participate is going to hurt the party, is going to hurt the table, and It might make people less likely to do things simply because out of character, you're sitting at the table doing nothing while the whole rest of the party has decided to spend the next 2 or 3 sessions doing a cave crawl or something along those lines. So using backstory as a crutch can be harmful, as well as not allowing your character to develop. Let's say your character is claustrophobic and they don't want to go in the cave simply because of the social contract they have with everybody else in their party, not even at a game, in their party. They're still going to try to overcome their fear. Maybe they play timid. Maybe they're always at the back instead of always at the front. Maybe they delay their turns until everybody else is done simply because they're afraid of what to do. At least you are still participating in the story. However, you're going to do something like that, talk with everybody at the table, preferably in a session 0, but even before the encounter occurs, that this is what you would like to do for your party, and make sure there's agreement. Now I'd like to talk about a few out-of-game things that are part of the social contract when we decide to play with a group of people, be it your friends or be it people you don't know on a virtual tabletop. Now, the social contract doesn't end out of game. And there are a few things, and this isn't going to be a very long session, but there are basically 3 big things that I have seen and that you do hear talked about. And it's something that you should be aware of when you see it in others, if you're a GM, when you see it at your table, and if you're a player, make sure you're not the one doing it. First thing is taking over the table. If you are a super big role player or you're just a super big personality in general, every once in a while, kind of check in with yourself, check in with the table, and make sure that your wish to have fun isn't taking over the fun from everybody else at the table. The second thing I would like to kind of bring up is inconsistent play. Inconsistent play means you're just not available for games a lot of times. If you know that you have a busy schedule and you can't make a once a week game, well, maybe look for a once a month game, maybe look for a once every 2 weeks game, but be realistic with yourself and the people at the table that you are actually in the game with them. Look, everybody misses games. I misses games. I had an issue with my house a few weeks ago, and I had to kind of within 2 hours of the game being played, I had to kind of back out of a game simply because real life happens. And you know what? Adulting is hard sometimes. But if it is something that you continually do, maybe before you get into this social contract, you should kind of decide what your limits are and make sure that the table is aware of what the limits are. And then the last out of game thing I'd like to talk about is being distracted, being a distraction, or disengagement during parts of the game that you don't like. Let's say you don't like when you go to town and you have to role play, or conversely, you're not particularly fond of combat within a game, especially if you're playing Pathfinder or, Dungeons and Dragons. If you don't like combat, you might not be playing the right game. I'm not saying that, you shouldn't have friends or you shouldn't be playing with this group, but maybe suggest a different game to play, or maybe you should be the game master of a different system so that you can engage in the type of game that you would like to play with like-minded players. Now, as far as a distraction, if you are consistently checking in on your phone, playing a game, if you are consistently distracted with various social media accounts, just scrolling through, not being very engaged in the game, or you're constantly looking up information not pertinent to what's happening at the table at all, making jokes, side stories, and bringing up odd bits of trivia at the table that have nothing to do with what's going on, then you're being a distraction. And that kind of breaks the social contract that you should have with your friends or the people at the table that you are playing with. Now, I hope this video on the social contract that we enter into when we decide to play a game with a group of people, you might have found it helpful. It might have made you think of things kind of a slightly different way, or made you think about, oh, wait a minute, do I do this kind of things at a table? I mean, that's kind of the point of a social contract, is to make sure that all of us who decide to sit down with each other and play are all trying to make sure that we are all having fun, not just you, other players at the table, and, at least in my mind, the other player at the table, which is the GM, because the GM is there to have fun as well. So I do hope you like this video, and if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.